A Gaza truce due to expire in the coming hour looks set to be extended amid reports of a permanent ceasefire following negotiations in Cairo. Iraq's Kurdish forces confirmed the capture of the strategic Mosul dam following days of clashes with Islamic State militants. And hundreds of thousands of Yemenis march on the capital Sana'a after the Houthi leader called for a revolution against the government. Hello there, you're watching AEE World News and I'm Fatima Bassem. Well, in the next 60 minutes, a 5-day truce in the Gaza Strip is due to expire. But reports coming out of Cairo, where Palestinian and Israeli delegations have been meeting for days in a bid to hammer out a permanent truce, seem to suggest that the truce is likely to be extended by several weeks. This as the Gaza death toll rose to over 2,000 Palestinians since the beginning of the brutal month-long Israeli assault on the besieged enclave.
60 minutes and counting. With a 5-day truce in Gaza due to expire, last-minute negotiations in Cairo between the Palestinians and Israelis seem to have hit a breakthrough. Palestinian sources have announced that an initial agreement on a permanent ceasefire has been reached. The Palestinian Islamic Jihad movement has reiterated this sentiment, adding that Palestinians do not want to go back to war. Earlier, the Israeli delegation returned to Tel Aviv, and officials said even if a long-term deal is not reached, a further extension of truce is likely. According to reports, the conditions entail the lifting of the Gaza siege, as well as the opening of the border to allow the entry of construction material under international supervision. For the majority of Palestinians, the absence of concrete information coming from the talks has rendered them pessimistic over the prospect of an agreement by midnight, which leaves Gazans no choice but to pray for peace.
Let's speak to Middle East expert Saib Shaath for more on this ceasefire deal on Gaza. Mr. Shaath, is there any telling what could happen in this critical hour as the ceasefire draws to an end?
According to a friend of mine who's close to the Palestinian team, was telling me earlier on, the Palestinians and the Israelis reach an extension to the latest ceasefire. That's what they're going to tell the world, which was due to run out midnight. They extended that for 4 weeks. That's roughly the period he's talking about. Under that deal, the resistance agreed not to resume its rocket fire, while the Egyptians and the Israelis consisted to open the both borders crossings, just to allow delivery to Gaza Strip of the variety of humanitarian assistance. That's their talk, but they are, if we go back about what the Israelis, they're expert in wasting time during what so-called negotiations. If we look at the experience the Palestinians have with the Israelis in the Oslo negotiations, 21 years today, they just give the impression to the world they are engaging the Palestinians in peaceful talks and negotiations. They keep the international community at bay and the Arab world as well at bay. They think the Palestinians are talking, they're going to reach something, and suddenly you find they looted the land of the West Bank. Many settlements, hundreds of settlements flourish in the West Bank. 700,000 right-wing Zionist settlers settling the West Bank, and the Palestinian Authority found itself as faced with so many demands in these negotiations of things to do with the security, and this security translated to be security of the settlers in the West Bank. So they turned the Palestinian Authority to be a protector of their settlements and the settlement projects. That's what is we are worried in here. If they can playing for the last 2 weeks with the negotiations and the talks in Cairo, if we look at the sort of game Netanyahu is playing today at the Cairo talks, just look at the delegates, the Israelis delegation there. it's a security composed delegations, military officials and security officers, while the Palestinians are having a political team from the resistance or the PA. That's kind of two security negotiating with political figures doesn't work. That shows you the Israelis are interested in only securing their settlements around the southern areas of Gaza and their cities, for the Palestinians not to launch rockets on them, and they are playing the game again to drag the Palestinian into that kind of talks with them and to be as negotiating for the sake of negotiations, as well-known term or phrase for it now. But I believe myself the Palestinian resistance are aware of that, and they are not going to heed to the game which is being lured in by the Israelis and the Egyptians and even the PA itself in this.
So do you think this is a stalling strategy by the Israelis to get as much as they can by postponing any agreement that would not benefit them? I mean, the Al-Quds brigades have rejected any extension because they believe that the suffering of the Palestinians will continue.
They are right, and all of the Palestinian factions, resisting factions in the Gaza Strip, will have that line. They will prefer to go back into the conflict with the Zionist entity, who they are the one who launched the attack on the Palestinians. They're the one who destroyed half of the Gaza Strip and sent half of the population homeless in the Gaza Strip and suffering and tightening the noose around the population. So the Palestinians will not gonna just sit and let them away with negotiation for the sake of negotiation, which Israel in that way can secure two major goals from that, showing their people they are trying to settle the issue and securing their settlements so there is no rockets going to hit them, escape any international punishment for the destruction they cause in Gaza, and try to water down the side effects of facing the international laws and norms in the future for any war of crimes they face, since they will say we are negotiating with the Palestinians, we're going to reach deals with the Palestinians like what they happened in Oslo, 21 years. And what actually the Palestinians resistance asking in Gaza today is all granted and agreed upon in Oslo. And the Israelis, they the one who didn't keep their words. And there was these agreements for the port or the international airport in Gaza, or for the crossing or the connections of the West Bank, or the freedom of movement of services, personnel, people, goods, all of that granted by Oslo and under the umbrella of United Nations and United States of America and Europeans. Did the Israelis respect that? Do these guarantors repel the Israelis to at least respect what they signed on? No, they don't. So the only hope the Palestinians have from this experience is to strengthen their resistance, is not to fall into the game of disarming or negotiation on their own weapons. This is the only guarantor for their existence and their own force to make the Israelis open the borders and comply with their demands.
Realistically speaking, could there be an agreement that holds the Israelis' so-called security needs and also the lifting of the ceasefire? Is that possible? The lifting of the siege?
The lifting of the siege going to happen, definitely going to happen, because the Israelis suffered and paid heavy price for keeping that siege. The Palestinians hurt them, and we will witness soon enough the collapse of Netanyahu government. I predict myself within a couple of weeks or months we will see this government crack from inside because it's really suffered under the Palestinian resistance attack, and the Israelis settlers of the southern border cities and towns, they are not going back without guarantee there is no going to attacks, and there is no guarantee from the Palestinians. Netanyahu didn't extract anything from the Palestinians. The other thing about security, the Israelis always play the security games. Nobody can satisfy the Israelis' demand of security. If they cover the globe, they look to the moon or Mars, they want security in there. That is the game the Israelis always play, and they try to bog down the Palestinians in that as they bogged down the Arabs before.
Is Tel Aviv in a position to continue fighting? Surely it does want to maintain this illusion of security, but can Prime Minister Netanyahu afford to resume fighting on a political and economic level?
You're great by mentioning the economical level. It's this entity was created to loot, and they looted Palestine. Those people came to enjoy villas and swimming pools in the West Bank or in Palestine, to have tourism or whatever corrupted value they're spreading around the world. They cannot sustain a conflict which is going to turn into like a war of attrition between the Palestinian resistance and the Israelis. They cannot stand that. The Israelis, they tried everything. They tried their air bombardment in Gaza. They didn't succeed to destroy any of the capabilities of the resistance. The resistance capability were underground. And the same thing, the land invasion and the sea attack and the drones. They tried everything. They couldn't destroy the Palestinian resistance. And the Palestinian resistance didn't even lose 3% of its stock of weapons it have. So I think the Palestinian resistance can, in the future, if it stays the ground not to fall within this political game happening in Cairo, can achieve its goals easily, because the Israelis have no other options except to accept the demands of the Palestinians.
All right, Middle East expert Saib Shah, thank you for speaking to Ali Tijah.
You're welcome.
Well, if the blockade of the Gaza Strip is not lifted during this round of talks, the head of the UN Relief Agency says it could be over a decade before Palestinians living in the coastal enclave see any improvement in their lives.
If there were a consolidated ceasefire, the question would be, is it a ceasefire that brings us simply back to the pre-existing conditions under the blockade? If that is the case, it will take years and years and years to rebuild, because the rhythm of importation of material that we had seen previously is so slow, submitted to so many conditions, that with the extent of destruction that has taken place now, you can really not imagine that we would achieve anything before 15 years or more, if it's at that rhythm.
Meanwhile, Israeli occupation forces in the West Bank have demolished the homes of 2 Palestinians accused of abducting and killing 3 Zionist settlers back in June. The homes of Hussam Qawasmi and Ammar Abu Aisha were destroyed before dawn, and the house of a 3rd suspect, Marwan Qawasmi, was sealed off with cement. The Israelis have accused the Palestinian resistance group Hamas of the abduction and killing, but police investigations into the incident have found no link to Hamas.
Today in the morning, they raided the house and sealed it off by using the concrete. They filled the house with concrete from the floor to the ceiling. God is greater than them.
Iraq's Kurdish Peshmerga forces have confirmed that they are now in full control of the country's largest dam. The advances follow days of heavy clashes between Islamic State militants and the Peshmerga, backed by the Iraqi military and US airstrikes. The Iraqi military's planes and drones pounded militant positions in the area, while Peshmerga forces continue to make more gains on the ground. This as Washington explained that US action in Iraq will be limited in scope and duration, stressing that the aim is to protect US interests. Meanwhile, the US announced that its military involvement will be stepped up soon. Meanwhile, US President Barack Obama convened his national security team as he took a break out of his summer holiday to chair 2 days of meetings over the Iraq crisis. The US Air Force reported that its jets struck 15 Islamic State targets around the Mosul Dam in northern Iraq, which included an anti-aircraft artillery gun and other weaponry. This is Sweden and the European Union's Humanitarian Affairs Commission have both pledged support for Iraq in its battle against the Islamic State militant group.
When we 28 foreign ministers of the European Union met for an emergency meeting on Friday, we were completely unanimous in our determination to do whatever we can to help all of the authorities of Iraq, central, local and regional, to defeat the horrible threat of ISIL, because that is a threat directed not only against Iraq and the peoples of Iraq, but directed against humanity itself.
In response, we in the European Union continue to mobilize more funding to help all Iraqis affected by fighting whenever they are. Just last week, the European Commission provided additional 5 million euros, bringing our funding to 17 million euros for now.
Let's get our senior Iraq correspondent on the phone. Wissam, tell us about the latest in fighting between Kurdish forces and IS militants.
Yes, in fact, the Iraqi security forces have backed the Peshmerga, especially the Air Force, in its fight and battle against the terrorism and militancy in the neighboring territories of Kurdistan, as the announcement of the Iraqi Defense Ministry and the Peshmerga Ministry in Kurdistan came together, saying that the Peshmerga in the
Yes, and
the Mosul Dam and the neighboring towns and villages over there. According to the Peshmerga Ministry, they say that the Peshmerga Ministry has ordered the Peshmerga soldiers to intensify their presence and to fortify their strongholds in the Dam of Mosul as the first step to contain any counterattacks may be launched by the ISIL or Islamic State affiliates. So far, the military operations which have been conducted across the country have actually killed more than 140 and wounded more than 200 others. According to the Iraqi Defense Ministry and the Peshmerga, the interrogation process are still underway, and saying that the cooperation between the central government and Erbil has made and brought very fruitful results, as the regaining of these territories were the main reason behind the cooperation of the Iraqi Defense Ministry in Baghdad and the Peshmerga in Erbil. Yes.
Have Iraqi airstrikes been able to thwart the advances of these militants?
In fact, according to the Defense Ministry spokesperson, Mr. Al-Askari, he stated that the military operations in Kurdistan and in Baghdad, especially in the western region and the northern region, have actually brought limits to the activities of the militancy, especially in Mosul and Salah ad-Din and Anbar. As according to the Iraqi Defense Ministry, the Iraqi security forces have intensified their presence in the outskirts of the city of Fallujah, and they are still waiting for the order after finalizing the logistic and the ammunition preparation.
All right, Wissam, thank you for those updates. Well, families have started returning to their homes after Kurdish forces liberated a number of towns from Islamic State militants. And now, despite the destruction and devastation, life is slowly beginning to return to normal.
It seems like life is slowly returning back to this Kurdish town. After days of fighting between Peshmerga forces and the so-called Islamic State militants, pickup trucks loaded with furniture made their way back to Mahmud, with several families returning home.
We fled Mahmur because of terrorist attacks targeting the city. People were on the mountain with the Peshmerga for 2 days. Now they have returned to the city after it came under the control of Peshmerga, who expelled the Islamic State militants. The situation is very good now after the defeat of militants. People have started returning gradually. In particular, over the past 2 days, the number of families that have returned has increased.
Residents here are optimistic with the Kurdish Peshmerga forces' ability to protect and defend them from IS threats.
Things are quiet and there is a large number of Peshmerga forces here. The militants are not able to stand before the Kurds because, unlike before, the Peshmerga have good weapons now. We did not have weapons to fight them before. Now we have very good weapons and we are confident of ourselves.
While shops and restaurants reopened, electricity was being restored to dozens of homes for the returning families. This as Kurdish Peshmerga fighters have now imposed control over the city in a bid to bring back some semblance of normalcy.
Things are quiet and normal. People are not going to the markets now because of the temperature. About 10 to 15 families have returned to their houses in the town, and this is a normal thing in war zones. People start gradually returning after the stability to resume their business, activity and reopen shops and restaurants.
And now, despite the destruction and devastation the militant group has left behind, residents seem happy to return to what they once called home.
Hundreds of thousands of angry pro-Houthi demonstrators have taken to the streets across several Yemeni cities to demand the downfall of the Sana'a government. Our correspondent in Sana'a, Mohammed Al-Attab, has the details.
It's a day of rage in Yemen. Hundreds of thousands of angry pro-Houthi demonstrators are back on the streets of several towns and cities across the country. This time they are demanding the immediate downfall of Sana'a government, which has been described as criminal and racist. The massive protest came in response to a monumental announcement by Houthi leader Sayyid Abdul Malik al-Houthi, who during a televised speech on Sunday night called on Yemenis to revolt against the government, announcing the start of a revolution.
We announced several primary steps of an unprecedented revolutionary and popular escalation. First, I call on the Yemeni people to take to the streets on Monday and participate in a mass demonstration in the capital Sana'a and in various provinces. Second, the massive crowds will head to Sana'a to stand side by side with the revolutionaries. Third, tents will be set up and squares will be open for sit-ins in the Sana'a province, and the capital will witness intense demonstrations until Friday.
The Houthi leader also accused Prime Minister Mohammed Basundua's government of incompetence and making false promises.
These outraged demonstrators who have gathered here from all walks of life, and there are hundreds of thousands to make their voices heard, are against what they describe as the unfair hike in fuel prices, which they say have further worsened the economic situation of the country.
Angered by their government, the protesters marched through Chain Square in the capital Sana'a, chanted anti-government slogans. In Sa'da province, a Houthi stronghold, Semla, since gripped the streets. Hundreds of thousands responded positively to the Houthis' call for mass protest to denounce the government in Sana'a. Demonstrators were seen carrying banners reading "No to corruption, no to sectarianism" as they marched towards central Sana'a. Protesters also called on the government to overturn its decision to raise fuel prices, which they say has come at the expense of the ordinary Yemenis, especially those who depend on fuel for their businesses.
Today, a large number of people took to the streets in a popular uprising. Our main demands are to improve the economy, bring down the government, and create a national dialogue. I don't think there's a single Yemeni that rejects these demands because they serve all the nation.
Yemen has been dogged by turmoil since pro-democracy protests forced autocratic President Ali Abdullah Saleh to step down in 2012 after 33 years in power. Now anti-government protests are expected to continue until Friday, the final day of the 5-day ultimatum, which Said al-Houthi issued the government, or else escalatory steps may be taken by what many observers are calling a powerful force to be reckoned with. Muhammad al-Attab, Al-Ittijah TV, Sana'a.
All right, let's get more with Mohammed over these protests in Sana'a. Mohammed, could we say that Yemenis from all walks of life were at the protest today? Could we say that the people that were at the protest represented all Yemenis?
Yes, we can say that because there were soldiers and the army. Also, there were lawyers, doctors, and people from all walks of life and from different professions. They have come together in a united position that they disagree against the Yemeni government's decision to lift its subsidies on the fuel derivatives, and that such kind of decision has further worsened the economic situation. They are angry at the Yemeni government for its failure to resolve the deteriorating economic and security situation in the country.
Yes, how have they responded to Abdel Malik al-Houthi's speech yesterday?
Most of the demonstrators are also from the Ansar Allah. Also, there were different people from the different. They represented the spectrum of the Yemeni people because they found that nobody has stand up against this decision, which they consider as an unfair decision, because these some economic experts say that the government should have different resolutions or different alternatives rather than raising up the fuel prices. They said that the government should have done something toward the corrupted people, and also should have done something other than lifting up the prices. So the Yemenis are determined to continue their protests and rallies until all of their demands are met, and they have said that they have already learned their lesson from the previous revolution of 2011, as most of the parties who represented the demonstrators have betrayed them and have also only worked for their own interest and for the partisan interest. And this time...
Okay, Mohammed, I'm going to have to stop you there. We are going to go back to our top story, and we are going to listen into US President Barack Obama discussing the situation in Iraq in Washington.
Including Kurdish and Iraqi security forces who are fighting on the front lines. Today, with our support, Iraqi and Kurdish forces took a major step forward by recapturing the largest dam in Iraq near the city of Mosul. The Mosul dam fell under terrorist control earlier this month and is directly tied to our objective of protecting Americans in Iraq. If that dam was breached, it could have proven catastrophic, with floods that would have threatened the lives of thousands of civilians and endanger our embassy compound in Baghdad. Iraqi and Kurdish forces took the lead on the ground and performed with courage and determination. So this operation demonstrates that Iraqi and Kurdish forces are capable of working together and taking the fight to ISIL. If they continue to do so, they will have the strong support of the United States of America. Second, we're building an international coalition to address the humanitarian crisis in northern Iraq. Even as we've worked to help many thousands of Yazidis escape the siege of Mount Sinjar, hundreds of thousands of Iraqis have been displaced by ISIL's violence, and many more are still at risk. Going forward, the United States will work with the Iraqi government, as well as partners like the United Kingdom, Canada, France, Italy, and Australia, to get food and water to people in need and to bring long-term relief to people who have been driven from their homes. Third, we will continue to pursue a long-term strategy to turn the tide against ISIL by supporting the new Iraqi government and working with key partners in the region and beyond. Over the last week, we saw historic progress as Iraqis named a new Prime Minister-designate, Haider al Abadi and Iraq's outgoing Prime Minister Maliki agreed to step down. This peaceful transition of power will mark a major milestone in Iraq's political development, but as I think we're all aware, the work is not yet done. Over the next few weeks, Dr. Abadi needs to complete the work of forming a new, broad-based, inclusive Iraqi government, one that develops a national program to address the interests of all Iraqis. Without that progress, extremists like ISIL can continue to prey upon Iraq's divisions. With that new government in place, Iraqis will be able to unite the country against the threat from ISIL, and they will be able to look forward to increased support, not just from the United States, but from other countries in the region and around the world. Let's remember, ISIL poses a threat to all Iraqis and to the entire region. They claim to represent Sunni grievances, but they slaughter Sunni men, women, and children. They claim to oppose foreign forces, but they actively recruit foreign fighters to advance their hateful ideology. So the Iraqi people need to reject them and unite to begin to push them out of the lands that they've occupied, as we're seeing at Mosul Dam. And this is going to take time. There are going to be many challenges ahead. But meanwhile, there should be no doubt that the United States military will continue to carry out the limited missions that I've authorized, protecting our personnel and facilities in Iraq, in both Erbil and Baghdad, and providing humanitarian support as we did on Mount Sinjar. My administration has consulted closely with Congress about our strategy in Iraq, and we are going to continue to do so in the weeks to come. Because when it comes to the security of our people and our efforts against a terrorist group like ISIL, we need to be united in our resolve. I also want to address the situation in Ferguson, Missouri. Earlier this afternoon, I spoke with Governor Nixon, as well as Senators Roy Blunt and Claire McCaskill. I also met with Attorney General Eric Holder. The Justice Department has opened an independent federal civil rights investigation into the death of Michael Brown. They are on the ground, and along with the FBI, they are devoting substantial resources to that investigation. The Attorney General himself will be traveling to Ferguson on Wednesday to meet with the FBI agents and DOJ personnel conducting the federal criminal investigation, and he will receive an update from them on their progress. He will also be meeting with other leaders in the community whose support is so critical to bringing it back.
Well, that was US President Barack Obama on the situation in Iraq. He did talk about the Kurdish forces recapturing the Mosul Dam. He also discussed about how this demonstrates cooperation, how the success of cooperation between the Kurdish forces and the US to root out the IS militants. He reiterated that these missions will be limited and that they will be to protect US interests and to help provide humanitarian relief, while also repeating his support to the Iraqi government and the Prime Minister designate Haider al-Abadi. You're watching Al Ittijah World News, still to come. The UN chief calls for restraint in the US city of Ferguson as National Guards deploy to quell the unrest. Welcome back to AEE TV World News. Here's a reminder of our top stories. A Gaza truce due to expire in the coming hour looks set to be extended amid reports of a permanent ceasefire following negotiations in Cairo. Iraq's Kurdish forces confirmed the capture of the strategic Mosul dam following days of clashes with Islamic State militants. And hundreds of thousands of Yemenis march on the capital Sana'a after the Houthi leader called for a revolution against the government. It was the removal of government fuel subsidies that sparked the latest round of mass protests in Yemen. However, the fiery speech by Sayyid Abdel Malik al-Houthi showed that other Houthi grievances have played a major role in what has been described as an uprising in the making.
In a speech that shook a nation, Sayyid Abdel Malik al-Houthi demonstrated during his televised address that he's a man who wields considerable power in Yemen. Within a few short hours after al-Houthi's call to topple the government, hundreds of thousands of supporters flooded the streets of the capital Sana'a and other cities. And this is not for the first time. A week earlier, similar protests were held as a warning to the government for its inaction to deal with the threat posed by Al-Qaeda, the never-ending national dialogue, and the dire economic situation. But the real reasons behind the Houthis' ultimatum is the constant undermining policies undertaken by President Abdurrabbu Mansour Hadi against the group. Hadi, who came to power thanks to the Saudi influence in Yemen, was supposed to be the man to unite the country after the revolution. However, the calls for separation have grown along with the presence of Al-Qaeda across the country since he took the helm. There is also the increasing number of extremist groups in the territories traditionally controlled by Houthis. Fighting has been raging for months in the provinces of Amran and Al Jawf. What is worse, Yemeni government forces have been aiding such militant groups, but so far they have failed to stop the spread of Houthi growing support base, which has now reached the outskirts of the capital. While the demonstrations are unlikely to topple the Saudi-backed government in Sana'a, Sayyid Abdel Malik al-Houthi has illustrated that he is no longer the leader of a small minority group, but a man who has significant leverage on the political future of Yemen.
We're now joined by Abu Bakr al-Shahami from London. He is a journalist from the Al Arabi Al Jadid Daily. Mr. al-Shahami, how serious do you think these calls for ousting the government are? Do you think we are witnessing another revolution?
I think it's too early to say if there'd be another revolution or not. What is happening is mass protests called by one group, the Houthis. The majority of the protesters, the vast majority of the protesters are from that group. So it's dissimilar to 2011, because what happened in 2011 was the Houthis were definitely a part of the uprising, the revolution that happened in 2011, but they weren't the only part, and there were many other different groups. What we're seeing now is the Houthis demonstrating their strength on the streets, as you saw in your own report, the huge numbers they do have from the northern provinces in particular. But it's more, I think what will happen is it will turn out to be more about pressurizing the government. The main things the Houthis say they want now is the removal of the current government, not the president actually, it wasn't one of their demands, but the removal of the government, the end of the lifting of the subsidies, so the return of fuel subsidies, which caused protests a few weeks ago. And the implementation of the national dialogue conclusions.
But can we really associate these grievances to just the Houthis, with more than half of the Yemenis living under the poverty line?
No, of course not. That explains the popularity of the Houthis. Of course, if you looked at the support of the Houthis today compared to, say, a year ago or 2 years ago or 5 years ago, they've vastly increased their support base. The difference now is because the scene is so polarized in Yemen, you have people who are angry at the government, they're disappointed with the government, they want to change the government, yet they may be wary of the Houthis. And so, there are split loyalties now. That doesn't mean the Houthi support base hasn't increased. Like I say, it's increased greatly. But unfortunately, because of the polarization that exists within Yemeni society now, which has increased vastly since 2011, if a call for protests is specifically made by the Houthis and not by anyone else, there will be others that even if they back what the Houthis want in this regard, they won't go out to protest because it's organized by the Houthis.
Some would say that the government is a puppet for Riyadh. Do you think that is true and that the marginalization of Houthis is systematic?
Sorry, puppets for who?
For Saudi Arabia.
Well, clearly over the last 30, 40 years, the Saudis have had a major role to play in Yemen. They've pretty much controlled the Yemeni political scene in terms of backing both, previous governments and opposition. So Saudi have always had a role to play. It's difficult to say whether the current government is a puppet regime of the Saudis. I wouldn't say that's true necessarily. However, at the same time, the Yemeni government knows that it has to have at least some sort of Saudi backing, because if it doesn't go according to what the Saudis want, so the Saudis will pull the plug with the money, which happened in the last few months, and the Yemeni government effectively has gone bankrupt. And now the Yemeni government, because of that, has gone back into the Saudi hands. So Saudi know how to play the game.
Yes, Abu Bakr al-Shahami, you are a journalist at the Al Arabi Jadid Daily. Thank you for speaking to Ali Tijah. The Syrian Air Force has bombed positions belonging to Islamic State militants in the northern province of Raqqa for a second straight day. 3 raids targeted the area around the town of Tabqa in western Raqqa and 4 hit near the Tabqa military airport. The other 7 strikes hit sites inside Raqqa city, killing at least 31 fighters. Well, the Syrian government has started to remove roadblocks and security checkpoints in the capital Damascus in a move aimed at lifting some of the distress caused by the country's more than 3-year-old crisis, while demonstrating confidence in the country's security situation.
Damascenes in recent days have started to feel a sense of normalcy in their daily lives after the Syrian government started removing roadblocks on key streets in the capital. The roadblocks have largely contributed to heavy traffic jams over the past couple of years, making traffic on the capital streets during the day intolerable. People in the capital no longer have to reroute to reach their destinations now that the government has lifted many roadblocks, initially set up near key areas that had previously been targeted by explosions.
When our military had pushed militants away, we began searching and patrolling to make sure no militants remain here.
Some of the roads were blocked off after deadly suicide attacks on key government buildings. They included the Sabah Bahrat Square, one of the most important public places in Damascus. It was practically shut off after a car bomb was used to target the central bank.
The move shows the security situation here is getting better and the government doesn't worry about security now. I hope they are correct.
The removing of roadblocks is a sign of a better security situation. We love our hometown and we don't want the situation with militant attacks to continue anymore.
Still, many in the capital believe that it's too early for the city to drop its guard, arguing that fighting on the outskirts makes another attack on the center inevitable.
Iran's Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif warned that there will be no agreement with the six world powers over Tehran's nuclear energy program unless UN sanctions are lifted. For his part, the chief of the UN nuclear watchdog said that Iran was fully committed to cooperating with the IAEA's investigation. Following talks with senior Iranian officials in Tehran, Yuki Amano added that he expects further progress in the coming days.
We have started the implementation of new measures, including the PMDs, 5 measures including PMD. We have started the discussion on the new practical measures that to be taken up as the new step. There were concrete discussions, but we cannot discuss which are the measures now. I hope and I expect that we can reach agreement soon. The objective of my visit is to discuss the cooperation and dialogue under the framework for cooperation at the highest level. And I heard from the highest level of Iran a firm commitment on the framework for cooperation.
The governor of the U.S. state of Missouri has ordered the National Guard to quell fresh violence in the town of Ferguson as tensions continue to mount over the fatal killing of a black teen by police. Meanwhile, the police response to those protests has prompted the UN Secretary General to call for restraint.
Hours after police fired tear gas to disperse people protesting against the fatal shooting of a black teenager by police, the curfew in the U.S. city of Ferguson has been lifted and the National Guard has been deployed. Their deployment comes after the police failed to quell the violence in the city, which has raged for days.
Molotov cocktails were thrown. There were shootings, looting, vandalism, and other acts of violence that clearly appear not to have been spontaneous but premeditated criminal acts designed to damage property, hurt people, and provoke a response.
The police department in St. Louis has come under strong criticism over Brown's death and its handling of the aftermath. This video released online shows police officers threatening to shoot a journalist and mace another. Even the UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon has called on U.S. authorities to ensure the protection of the rights of protesters in Ferguson.
The Secretary General is aware that U.S. federal authorities have announced an investigation into the killing of Michael Brown. He hopes local and federal investigations will shed full light on the killing and that justice will be done. The Secretary General calls on the authorities to ensure that the rights to peaceful assembly and freedom of expression are protected. He calls on all to exercise restraint, for law enforcement officials to abide by U.S. and international standards in dealing with demonstrators.
Witnesses say the teenager was non-violent and compliant at the time of the shooting. His family says he is a victim of racism. A preliminary autopsy has found that Michael Brown was shot at least 6 times, including twice in the head.
And what does this preliminary autopsy tell us? It verifies that the witness accounts were true, that he was shot multiple times. And it's going to be one of those things that we have to get all the witness statements out and look at all the autopsies, all the evidence to put this picture together. But his family knows that the witnesses, what they were telling them about him being shot multiple times in broad daylight was accurate.
The fatal shooting of the black teenager Michael Brown by police earlier in August has not only left the streets of Ferguson, Missouri restless, but it has reignited the national debate surrounding race and police brutality in the United States.
Here's a reminder of tonight's top stories. A Gaza truce due to expire in the coming hour looks set to be extended amid reports of a permanent ceasefire following negotiations in Cairo. Iraq's Kurdish forces confirmed the capture of the strategic Mosul dam following days of clashes with Islamic State militants. And hundreds of thousands of Yemenis march on the capital Sana'a after the Houthi leader called for a revolution against the government. Well, that's all from me and the Al Jazeera News team. Thank you for watching and good night.